Chapter 8. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since he saw those emerald eyes. Since he'd smelled her intoxicating wildflower scent. Since he tasted her sweet honeyed lips. What the hell had happened? One minute they were enjoying breakfast and the next she disappeared. Gideon had assumed the worst, thinking she'd been taken. He sent the pack into a frenzy to track her down, only to receive camera footage of her willingly running away and into a waiting rideshare car. Running away from him. He felt like a complete idiot. The worst part was he still didn't know why she ran away. Hell, he didn't even know her last name. They had skipped right past formalities and phone numbers and jumped straight into bed. He hadn't been able to help himself. Something inside him felt connected to this girl. He wanted her. His wolf wanted her. For a minute he was positive she was theirs. Their mate. The thought made his heart beat fast and his wolf perk up. Then everything had gotten messed up. He roared in frustration and sent a chair flying across his office. It smashed through the drywall, leaving a 2-foot by 3-foot hole. It looked eerily similar to about a dozen other patched-up areas throughout the complex. Gideon's temper had been especially hard to rein in since Dahlia left. His wolf was more agitated than he'd ever known it to be. No amount of physical exertion seemed to calm it. There had to be a reason why she ran. He swore he would discover that reason. Whoever she was afraid of, and he would make them suffer. Sir. Gideon's eyes shot toward the voice. It was one of his assistants, James. The poor kid looked even more nervous than usual. Gideon took several centering breaths to calm the ever-growing bloodlust simmering just beneath the surface. Yes. Gideon tried to sound composed, but the edge in his tone still caused the other man to jump. Our guests will be arriving in a few hours. Would you like to set up dinner in one of the banquet rooms here or at a restaurant nearby? Guests. Gideon's eyes narrowed. The visiting alpha and his children. From one of the London territories. The assistant was sweating now. His instincts were clearly telling him to flee the presence of an agitated alpha, but his job required him to stay. Let's do dinner at Palermo's. Gideon sighed and dismissed the assistant with a wave. These plans had been made months ago, but with everything going on they had completely slipped his mind. Lord Edgar had been a close friend of his father's. If he remembered correctly, Edgar has a son close to Gideon's age and a daughter a few years younger. It was his duty to occasionally entertain alphas from other areas. Gideon rubbed his temples as the office doors opened. Once again. What did you do? Threaten to eat James? The poor guy looked like he'd shit his pants when he ran past me just now. Arya stood in the doorway. Gideon let out another deep sigh and she quickly crossed the space between them. Hey! She squeezed his shoulder. I know you're still upset about her, but you can't keep taking it out on the rest of the pack. Your demeanor has been less than pleasant these past weeks. What exactly are you saying? Gideon's tone was sharper than he had intended. But Arya didn't even flinch. You've been a first-class dick. An alpha hole. A royal pain in everyone's wolf. An ass. Haven't you noticed everyone avoiding you? Arya raised an eyebrow at him. Gideon fixed his gaze on Arya. I'm surprised you're aware of what's happening here in the pack, considering you've been noticeably absent for months now. That's not true. Arya took a step away and turned her eyes toward the window. I know you miss Nova, but you've got to make time for your other friends. You can't just stay hidden in your apartment for days at a time. He placed a soft hand on her arm. I don't know what really happened to you when you were taken. I know you say you can't remember. He stopped. This wasn't the time to bring it up. We have guests coming in from the London territories this evening. I expect you to be visible and on your best behavior while they're here. Whatever you say, Alpha. Blue eyes glared up at him momentarily before she stormed out of the office. He had definitely hit a nerve. Gideon buried his face in his hands. Things just kept getting worse. He turned back to his desk and focused on his work. Thoughts of Dahlia intruded at a steady pace, but he powered through. He was an alpha. He had responsibilities. She may be their mate, but she made her choice for now, and he would not allow her to continue to get the better of him and his wolf. Chapter 9. The Funhouse was a speakeasy and strip club known for its exotic dancers and unusual acts. The entrance was exactly what the name implied, a fully functioning funhouse. Anyone could pay their fee to enter and proudly find their way out of the maze of misleading corridors. You had to be well informed or know one of the dancers to learn exactly where the club's secret entrance was. Of course, the VIPs were offered the alternative of paying a small fee to go straight into the back entrance and skip the shenanigans. The funhouse entry was a far more popular option. Among the distorted mirrors and misshapen walls was a small room with 6 identical mirrors that sat in a hexagonal shape. The lighting was intentionally low. If you didn't know the precise spot to look, it would be easy to miss the small engraving that read, "Fun awaits" on the edge of one of the mirrors. Pressing on the bottom right corner of this particular mirrored panel would cause it to push inward,
revealing a dimly corridor.
If you were brave enough to follow this ghostly chamber, you would eventually come across a bouncer and gain entry to the Fun House Club. Inside, it was decorated like a vintage circus and even more grotesquely chaotic than the twisted funhouse front. Red and white tint panels lined the roof and walls. Antique, bright bulb signs flashed drinks, dancers, psychics, and a variety of other options. The mostly missing and burned out letters only added to the aesthetic. Small private booths lined the walls, some open and some with their thick crimson curtains drawn closed. An antique horse marked the entrance to the carousel suite. VIPs could pay extra to take their favorite girls into the elaborately decorated carousel suite for private dances, champagne parties, and whatever other lascivious acts they didn't want the rest of the club witnessing. The funhouse was truly one of a kind. Fire breathers, contortionists, and sword swallowers were just a few of the oddities you could catch performing on any given night. Dahlia didn't have any particularly unusual skills, besides the obvious magic powers that were understandably kept hidden, but she'd been hired for her talent on the pole and floor. She had a knack for erotic dancing, and the boozy boys at the club just couldn't seem to get enough. Dahlia finished her 3-song set and paraded off the stage and onto the floor. The club was unusually slow tonight. "Hey, Poison Ivy," a slurred voice called. "How about a dance?" Her stage name gave her an odd degree of satisfaction. It was as if she could reveal her true nature without actually doing so. Her powers had been a part of her for so many years. She often longed to be able to share them fully with the world, instead of keeping them hidden. Dahlia pasted on her best smile and pranced toward the liquor-fueled patron. He was known for tipping well, but also for being incredibly handsy with the girls. "I guess nothing is free." Her hips swayed with each step while one hand flipped her long red hair for effect. She slipped easily into her well-practiced alter ego and approached his table. A few feet away, something stopped Dahlia in her tracks. There was an uncomfortable prickling on the skin of her bare arms and neck. A muffled cry and shouting could barely be heard over the pulsating bass of the club music. Dahlia whirled toward the private booths. At least a dozen had their curtains drawn shut. She took a deep breath in, allowing the world to slow down around her until all she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears. The muffled cry came again, and she jerked her head to the right. 7 booths from the end. Her magic swirled a confirmation within. She bolted forward and thrust open the curtain. 3 men sat within the concealed space. One held a dancer by the back of the neck. A second raised a needle toward the silky caramel skin of her exposed inner arm. The woman screamed and flailed, working to jerk her arm free. Dahlia recognized the needle man immediately. It was Dean, which meant the unfortunate dancer was his ex, Kinsey. Dahlia's rage blossomed in her chest like a carnivorous flower. Kinsey had been a drug addict who worked hard to clean up her life. Dean was her abusive and sadistic boyfriend who had gotten her hooked in the first place. When Kinsey had gotten clean, she left Dean and her life began to turn around. Looked like Dean was having a hard time letting go. Dahlia would help him. She grabbed the closest beer mug and slammed it into Dean's face. He dropped the needle and screamed as shards of broken beer-soaked glass penetrated the thin membrane of his eyes and face. The second man jumped up, grabbing Dahlia by the hair. She cried out as he wrenched her backward. Dahlia caught sight of Kinsey for a moment. Her crystal blue eyes were wide with fear. "Run!" Dahlia screamed at the shocked woman. Kinsey did. The dancer dashed out of the booth, Dean still clutching his wounded face, chased after her. The third man made a move to get in front of Dahlia, tracing a stubby finger down the line of her throat and collarbone. "I think this whore needs a lesson in respect." His soured whiskey breath blew over her face and she turned away from him. Dahlia struggled to free herself from the firm fist wrapped within her hair. When the third man leaned close enough to her face to kiss her, she thrust her fingers forward, aiming her blue and green almond-shaped nails straight for the soft flesh of his eyes. She missed one but made purchase with the second. He wailed in pain and frustration. Dahlia used the momentary chaos to slam the sharp heel of her stiletto into the kneecap of the man still holding her. He tumbled backward and out of the booth as they both went crashing to the club floor. Dahlia looked up dazed. She could see black-clad security guards rushing around her. The three men were hauled to their feet and escorted out. Kinsey stood in the corner, mascara running down her red, tear-streaked face. A jacket covered her shoulders as the other dancers huddled around her in support. A rough pair of hands tightened around Dahlia's upper arms, yanking her to her feet. She was forcibly walked through the club and into a back room. The office door slammed shut and she turned to find Rob, the club's manager, glaring back at her. "Why is it you every fucking time?" he roared angrily. Dahlia looked at him in shock. He was trying to get Kinsey hooked again. He had the needle to her arm. "Why are we still letting Dean in the club? Kinsey is a big girl. She shouldn't have allowed herself to get mixed up with that junkie in the first place. And we're not going to lock out good-paying customers just because their girlfriends have habits." He pointed a bony finger in her face. "Every week you seem to get into trouble defending one of the dancers. You're not their daddy. You don't get paid to scare away customers or break their noses." Dahlia glared in disgust. Management didn't care about the girls. That much had been made clear the moment she walked in the door. But Dahlia had always felt protective of them. She tended to notice things when others didn't and intervened when everyone else turned their gazes. Maybe it came with her ability to make things grow. She was a nurturer, maternal, and someone had to take care of those who were written off as less worthy by the bullshit patriarchy. "The only reason I haven't fired you yet is because you're constantly in such high demand. We both know they're not coming for your sunny personality." Rob stared hungrily at her nearly bare breasts. Dahlia resisted the urge to cover the thin green lace with her hands. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction, even if the look in his eyes made her stomach churn. "Now get back to work. And no more fights. I mean it. Those tits won't save you forever." Dahlia pushed free from the office and its stifling air. She looked around the club inside. A tall, dark-haired figure caught her attention. His shoulders were broad and his head towered above the other patrons. Butterflies fluttered in her stomach and her pulse raced. She crossed the bar, reaching a hand up to his shoulder. He turned and her heart felt as if it had abruptly dropped to the base of her ribcage, cold and still. It wasn't him. It wasn't Gideon. She couldn't smell the forest, and so she should have known. His mocha eyes stared down at her expectantly. His gaze flicked between her face and the hand that still lingered on his shoulder. She swallowed her disappointment and growing embarrassment. "Want to dance?" she offered, letting her voice drop to the sultry tone she often used when she was working. The not Gideon trailed his eyes over her. "Lead the way." His voice was sharp and clipped, not smooth and deep in her. Disappointment grew. She would give him the dance, take his money, and pretend his eyes were sapphire. Then she would go home and regret, just like she did every night since she ran from Mountain's End. After a long and exhausting night, Dahlia's apartment greeted her with its usual dim glow. The sun was beginning to rise. Its soft light spilled through the windows in shades of cotton candy pink and pale peach. She pulled the shades closed and began her nightly, night for her at least, routine. Her breath hitched when she noticed the various potted plants around the base of the windowsill. They were dead. Again. She couldn't remember how many times this had happened recently. She took a deep inhale and allowed the magic to flow through her tired limbs. One by one the flowers and greenery returned from the wilted brink of death. Petals opened and leaves unfurled. Surrounding herself in nature calmed her body and mind. She loved gardens, streams, and open meadows. Her favorite place to visit were the mountains and woods. The woods. A deep sigh heaved from her chest. She thought of Gideon and his woodsy masculine scent. She wished she could bury her face in his chest. A pang of guilt stabbed her in the gut when she thought of the way she had left him behind, sitting alone in a diner wondering what went wrong. Had it been a mistake to leave? Her heart hurt on a regular basis and her plant seemed to wither in response. It felt insane to have such strong feelings for someone she had just met. Maybe she'd been brainwashed by the sex. Hormones can really mess with your head. Oh, that sex. Another exasperated breath forced itself from her lungs. She doubted she would ever sleep with another man again. What was the point? There was no way anyone could compare to Gideon. His body, his mouth, his scent. She hugged a pillow close as the aching in her chest grew even more pronounced. It was embarrassing, but she missed him. When did she become the kind of girl who fell head over heels for some guy after one night? Of course he wasn't just some guy. No. He was special, different. Frustration bubbled up within her as tears dropped to the soft pillow beneath. This wasn't healthy. It was time to move on for her own good. She needed to leave all thoughts of Gideon and Mountain's End behind. Chapter 10. By the time Gideon made his way to the restaurant, accompanied by Leah and Lance, his visitors had already arrived. The private dining room at Palermo's had been set with enough Italian cuisine to feed a small army. The restaurant's owner, Vincenzo, took great pride in his business. An older man with firm features and salt and pepper hair gave Gideon a wide smile as he entered. Look at our young Gideon. You're looking more like your father each day. Edgar. Gideon hugged the familiar frame of his old family friend. You remember my son Harrison? It had been nearly 15 years since Gideon had seen the children. Harrison was close in age to Gideon himself, but that's where the similarities ended. Where Gideon was broad and strong, Harrison looked thin and wiry. He hunched forward in his oversized suit, seemingly muttering to himself. Eerie gold eyes peeked through light brown hair that fell in shaggy pieces around his face. Gideon's wolf felt untrusting of the man. Something was off about him. Of course. Harrison. Gideon reached out a hand to shake, but Harrison simply smiled at him. Edgar cleared his throat. And of course you must remember my beautiful Liv. A young woman, similar in age and size to Arya, turned to face him. She was indeed beautiful. She had light brown hair like her brother. Hers fell in waves past her shoulders. The siblings had similar golden eyes as well. Where Harrison's were deep gold, Liv's were a softer honey shade. Heavy makeup coated her delicate features. Gideon inhaled deeply and recoiled. Perfume poured off of her, making it hard to distinguish her scent from the artificial chemicals. It was too much for his sensitive Lycan sense of smell. She gave him a coy smile. Alpha, it's been a while. You're all grown up. Honey eyes blinked up at him through thick lashes. She leaned slightly forward, exposing the billowing cleavage in her fitted magenta dress. He was familiar with the flirtatious tactic. His wolf huffed unhappily. As have you, Liv. He gave her a courteous and expected kiss on the back of the hand. His wolf did not appreciate the touch. It pushed forward for control, and Gideon worked hard to keep it subdued. Edgar was smiling. He watched the interaction between Gideon and Liv with heightened interest. Harrison simply looked around the room, bored. A clearing of the throat brought a second woman into Gideon's line of sight. Edgar looked back at her. And last but not least, my personal aide, Abigail. She's been invaluable to our pack. Gideon smiled politely at the aide, but she did not return the gesture. Abigail was as lovely as Liv, if not more so. He could tell by her scent that she was human. She was taller than the other woman. Her curves were well hidden in a smart set of dress clothes. The way the fabric pulled tightly across her chest told Gideon she was probably well endowed beneath the button-up. Fair blonde hair was wrapped around her head in an intricate twist of braids. Two icy, pale blue eyes stared back at him. Her frosty demeanor was a bit odd. She finally broke their gaze, and Gideon continued with his own introductions. Let me introduce my beta, Lance Atwell, and my personal advisor, Leah Atzela. He gestured to the food stacked high on the tables. Now please, everyone help yourself. Vincenzo has outdone himself again. The group took their seats and began piling their plates with chicken piccata, homemade pastas, meaty lasagna, stuffed shells, savory soups, fresh pizzas, and more. Wine was poured and poured again. The London lichens certainly seemed to enjoy their alcohol. Edgar's glass was continually refilled as he reminisced about his time with Gideon's father. Liv attempted to engage Gideon in conversation every moment. His mouth wasn't full of food. Abigail trained her cold eyes on him at all times. Harrison kept his focus on Leah. She glared back at him. Lance sat quietly, looking as if he wished to be anywhere but here. How's your sister doing? Arya, isn't it? Edgar poured himself another glass of red wine. She's doing well. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it this evening. More like she had been a no-show. Gideon made a mental note to check in with her when they got back. You are both unmarried, correct? Gideon felt the energy in the room shift as all eyes landed on him. That's correct, he said. You know how it is, being alpha takes up a lot of time. Edgar chortled lightly. It certainly does. There was a gleam in his gaze. That set Gideon's wolf on alert. He took another long swig from his glass and continued. You know your father always wanted to unite our packs. We spoke about it often. Oh. Gideon could feel the tension from his Ulrich pack members. The air became stiff and hot. My daughter Liv would make a perfect mate for you, Gideon. Next to him, Lance choked on a piece of chicken and began coughing loudly. Leah smacked a hand across his back in an attempt to help. Edgar didn't even seem to notice. She comes from a strong alpha family. She's beautiful, and she's certain to give you many legacies. A line by marriage to one of the London territories would make you the most powerful pack there is. Gideon looked to Liv. She was smiling, but he thought he picked up a scent of anxious energy from her. It was impossible to be sure. Her perfume obscured a clear reading of her feelings from him. Abigail, on the other hand, radiated anger, frustration, and tension. She looked back and forth between Liv and Gideon. Lance finally finished coughing and chugged his water down. Gideon was so surprised and taken aback that he simply stared at the water glass as it slowly emptied. It's what your father would have wanted. Gideon looked up to find Edgar staring intensely at his face. Power still radiated off of the older alpha. He clearly hadn't lost any of his former strength. Gideon couldn't find the right words to speak. Edgar had said Liv would make a perfect mate. Mate. He had a mate. She had slipped through his fingers. The silence shrouding the table became unbearable. What a generous proposal, Leah finally said, mercifully breaking the silence. Our alpha will think it over and get back to you. In the meantime. She pushed back from the table, standing up, and knocked on one of the doors. When it opened, she quickly whispered something and took her seat again. Dessert, anyone? The door swung open and a barrage of delicate, creamy, and perfectly crafted cakes, pastries, and custards were ferried out on fresh trays. Gideon gave Leah a quick thank you under his breath as the group served themselves. The rest of the night passed more slowly. The awkward tension clung to the air. When they finally returned to the complex, Gideon said his polite goodnights and returned to his apartment. He lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling.
Marie-Liv.
He could see how it made sense, but his wolf was appalled. Could he really settle down with someone just because it was a smart match? And with Dahlia still out there, he shoved all thoughts of the dinner out of his mind, and instead focused on his memories of Dahlia. The last thing he saw were those emerald green eyes as he and his wolf fell into a dreamless deep sleep. Meetings the following morning came earlier than desired. Gideon strode into his office only to find Aaron and Lucas waiting for him. To what do I owe this morning visit? His voice was rough as his irritable wolf snapped beneath the surface, but the two didn't shy away. The doors pushed open as Lance entered. What's going on? Lance eyed the two suspiciously. Aaron grinned. We've got a proposition for you. Gideon dragged a hand down his face. No more propositions. I've had my fill of those for the week. Aaron's brown eyes lit up. That's exactly why we're here. Sounds like you may be getting hitched. Gideon snarled. Nothing's been decided for certain yet. For certain or not, what kind of pack mates would we be if we didn't make sure you had a proper bachelor outing before being tied down to some London princess? Gideon groaned. It was too early for this. I don't need a bachelor outing. Have a lot of work to do. He sidestepped the two, heading toward his desk. Aaron cut him off. You've been working nonstop for the last few weeks. Let us take you out. It could be good for you to get out and have some fun, Lucas added. Gideon turned to Lance. His trusted beta always had the choice to speak freely. I hate to agree with them, but you have been in an especially uptight mood recently. Gideon knew uptight in Lance speak meant completely insufferable to be around. He threw his hands up in defeat. What did you have in mind? Aaron's grin widened. I know the perfect spot. It's outside Mountain's End. Very secluded. Hot girls, great drinks. And the best part? No one will even recognize you. Chapter 11. The drive to Aaron's club of choice was filled with rowdy whoops and hollers. As shots were continuously passed around the limo, Gideon had insisted they not make a big deal out of this. They kept the bachelor party crew small. Consisted of Gideon, Aaron, Lucas, and Lance, much to his unhappiness. Aaron was the type of friend who kept track of how much everyone had to drink, insisting it was never enough. Even Lance wasn't safe from the mandatory drinking rituals. The boys were well lubricated by the time they reached the fun house. Lance asked, an annoyed tone slipping into his voice. You brought us to a carnival attraction. Aaron shook his head. We're not taking the amusement park entrance. Not when we're arriving in style with the biggest, baddest alpha there is. Gideon rolled his eyes at the gratuitous flattery. Aaron was a real kiss-ass. When he was drunk, the group made their way to a plain, unmarked metal door around the back of the building. After a few quick knocks, the door opened. My man. Aaron grabbed the doorman by the hand in a familiar gesture. I called ahead. We've got something special going on tonight. Aaron threw a mischievous grin toward Gideon. The group was led down a dark hallway that smelled of fresh smoke and spilled whiskey. They pushed their way through a large black curtain that separated the hallway from the pulsating music beyond. Welcome to the funhouse, boys. Bright lights and circus features dominated the dimly lit space. Bass reverberated through the club, sinking deeply into Gideon's chest. Striking. Women in lacy lingerie, shimmering chains, and sometimes nothing at all swept dangerously across the open space. Their eyes turned at the sight of the VIP curtain opening. Looks like the sharks have smelled blood, Lucas acknowledged as the women began moving toward them. A tall brunette in a sheer floor-length gown led them to a private table in the middle of the club. It was several rows back but directly in the center of the stage. An excessively busty blonde with blue lipstick and rhinestone skull pasties took their drink orders. On stage, a mocha-skin dancer with pink and violet braids and neon snakeskin stilettos finished up her set. The dancer moved with power and grace. Her muscular physique allowed her to make advanced strength-oriented pole tricks seem effortless. Cheers to our favorite alpha getting hitched. Aaron raised a shot in the air. Nothing's been decided yet, Gideon grumbled. Well then drink anyways because you've been a fucking nightmare lately. He downed the drink before adding respectfully. All eyes turned to Gideon, awaiting his retaliation. Much to everyone's surprise, Gideon actually laughed. Before raising his glass in the air and downing the liquid, fire burned along his throat, warming his insides. The group cheered and followed suit with celebratory toasts of their own. Gideon felt his shoulders begin to relax. It was nice to get away from the pressures of being alpha. He had forgotten how refreshing it felt to go somewhere outside of his immediate territory and just be normal. He watched his packmates interact. Lucas shook his head at something ridiculous Aaron had just said. Aaron gestured wildly and in this big manner. Even Lance loosened up. He leaned back in his chair and sipped a beer, allowing a small bit of the chip on his shoulder to take the night off. Gideon loved seeing his friends like this. A twinge of guilt hit him when he thought about how hard he worked them. He had high expectations and they, his most trusted allies, always delivered. The only one missing from their crew was Darren. He and Nova were off on their mission. He missed having Darren around, but he was truly happy that he had found his mate. Gideon's wolf whined at the mention of a mate. He couldn't deny there had been a hole in his soul since Dahlia disappeared. No amount of convincing himself he could move on actually helped him do so. He looked around the club. There were beautiful women of all shapes and sizes. An exotic blue-haired beauty. I fucked him from across the lounge. She was wearing a sheer bra and panty set that revealed a thatch of matching blue pubic hair. One of her aqua-nailed hands slid up the skirt of a pale-skinned dancer in a pink and white maid outfit and large fox ears. A matching orange tail swished as the fox girl ground her hips against the other dancer's fingers. They both stared longingly toward Gideon, hoping to entice him. He felt nothing. No desire, no craving to chase, to claim. He sighed. You okay, mate? Lucas placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. Lucas had always been one of the more sensitive pack members. Gideon nodded and clinked their glasses together. Lucas eyed him a moment longer, but did not question his mood again. The lights began to dim on stage, taking on a harsh green glow. The DJ announced the next dancer. Poison Ivy or something like that. Silky curtains drew back to reveal a small curvy woman with her back to the audience and one hand on the pole. She was wearing deep green thigh-high stiletto boots and a barely their set of panties made of soft green ivy leaves. Her back was bare, but a few ivy leaves had been scantily laid across her chest as well. Long red hair was pinned up high above her head. Gideon's wolf snapped to attention. Oh, now you're going to show some interest. The girl on stage began to move, swaying her hips from side to side. Her legs were strong and her ass was perfect. Gideon got a sudden sinking feeling he couldn't identify. Yeah, baby, Erin catcalled from the audience. She rotated to the side, swiveling her hips in a slow figure 8 and giving the crowd a teasing view of her generous and barely hidden breasts. One hand slid the length of her body, moving seductively upward and landing in her fiery locks. She gracefully pulled a pin from her head, allowing the blood-red hair to tumble down and obscure her face. Gripping the pole tightly, she lifted both legs off the ground, swinging them around in front of the pole. Before clacking both heels loudly together, the crowd let out wild cheers. The mesmerizing dancer leaned smoothly in for a body roll before slamming to the ground, knees spread wide. The roars of approval from the crowd grew louder and more frenzied. Gideon's gut feeling intensified. Poison Ivy rolled her hips, grinding on the floor as she teased her fingers over her most intimate areas. In one sexy move, she whipped her head around and flipped her hair to the other side. She let out a coy smile and crawled toward the edge of the stage. Gideon's wolf was on full alert now. He knew those moves, he knew that body. The girl settled near the crowd, bouncing up and down on her knees as she continued to touch herself. She looked up at the audience for the first time since the routine had started. Oh shit, Gideon heard Lance murmur. He could feel the whole table tense. The men and their wolves were being hit with unidentifiable emotions streaming toward them from their alpha. His wolf roared in anger. Mine. Up on the stage, emerald eyes went wide as they locked with Gideon's, and all he saw after that was red. Dahlia pinned the red wig for at least the 10th time. The long crimson locks really completed the poison ivy aesthetic, but they were a pain in the ass. She finished the look with a deep red lip. Another day living the dream, she muttered to herself. Hey, Sad Ivy. Christina plopped into the seat next to her. Stop calling me that. Christina scoffed. I'll stop calling you that when you stop moping over that guy from Luna plus Lupin. I can tell you're still thinking about him. That hickey better not be from Zach. Dahlia eyed the strawberry skin on Christina's neck. Christina dabbed concealer over the mark. He has been really sweet this time. You're just being grumpy because you miss your mystery man. I told you I could set you up with one of Zach's friends. A commotion from the other end of the dressing room caught Dahlia's attention. What a cheap ass. Maya was back from her set and staring in dismay at the wilted bouquet of roses on her vanity. Rodney bought me these tonight and they didn't even last an hour. Probably still longer than Rodney can last, one of the other girls shouted. The dressing room erupted in giggles. Even Maya relented and laughed at the joke. Dahlia rubbed her hands together self-consciously. She knew the crippled flowers had nothing to do with Rodney's budget and everything to do with a turbulent emotional storm brewing inside her. Cheer up. There is an extremely hot table of VIPs tonight. I'd take anyone home. Or maybe all four. I'd be down to try a fivesome if you know what I mean. She winked as Dahlia swatted at her in horror. Wishful thinking, but you don't have enough holes for that many guys. Christina rolled her eyes. Use your imagination. I have hands and feet. Feet. Dahlia roared with laughter. My secret weapon. Christian waggled her eyebrows and raised one leg in the air. Dahlia and Christina fell into a giggling fit that had them sliding out of their chairs. Christina always knew how to make Dahlia laugh. She may have been a flaky bitch, but she was Dahlia's flaky bitch. Good to see you smiling. Now go make that money. Dahlia finished zipping up her forest green thigh-high boots and marched toward the stage. The familiar nerves and butterflies filled her stomach as she stepped into position. Something raised the hairs at the back of her neck. Her magic was swirling but she had no idea why. The curtains slowly drew open, allowing the verdant lights to bathe her skin. In their absinthe incandescence, and the last traces of worry vanished as she began to move her body. Dance was therapeutic for Dahlia. It always had been. She danced competitively as a teenager. After her parents forced her out, stripping had just made sense. She rolled and slithered around the stage. Her hips twisted and turned, urged on by the cheers that poured loudly from the crowd. She slipped into the familiar routine easily, but something still felt off. Finally she turned toward the audience, sweeping her gaze across the drunk and enlivened crowd. All sorts stared back at her, but one stood out like an arrow to the ribs. Gideon. Shock and surprise were clear in those sapphire eyes. They burned into her for a few seconds before chaos erupted. He shot to his feet, flipping the table he had been seated at and then smashing through people and furniture on his way to the stage. Dahlia's blood surged as her pulse skyrocketed. She panicked. Quickly getting to her feet, she turned and ran. Her feet pressed forward unsteadily and she cursed the 8-inch heels for impeding her getaway. After what seemed like an eternity, she pushed through the entrance to the dressing room. She had barely made it to her vanity before the door flew open, and Christina came flying in. What the hell just happened? Dahlia worked to catch her breath. It's him. Christina's jaw dropped. No fucking way. How did he find out you worked here? Dahlia thought about the shocked look on his handsome face. I don't think he knew. I think it was a coincidence. What are the chances? Christina mused. He is like next level hot. Are you going to talk to him? The dressing room door opened again, but this time it was a surly-looking Rob who walked in. I need a word, Dahlia. He crossed his arms indignantly and glared at Christina. She took his hint and quickly exited. I can explain. He held up a finger to silence her. I don't want to hear it. Lucky for you. Your boyfriend's pockets run deep. He's paid for the damages to the club as well as the medical treatment the bouncers will need. Now he wants to see you. Dahlia's mouth dropped open. You didn't kick him out? A man like that can buy whatever he wants, including the funhouse if he chose. Tonight he bought your dances for the rest of the evening. As in all night? That's right. Now get on over to the carousel suite and treat him nice. If he leaves here unhappy, you're fired. Dahlia's mind was whirling. She took off the red wig and brushed out her natural black curls. Her mind replayed the shock and fury in his deep blue eyes. Gideon had looked absolutely livid. Anxiety roiled within her. She never wanted him to see her here like this. Summoning up the last of her courage, she took a quick shot and then headed to the carousel suite. Chapter 12. 3 men leaned against the outside of the suite. She recognized Aaron and Lucas from the club, along with another blonde she was unfamiliar with. They gave her wary looks and went out of their way not to look down at her scantily clad figure. Boys, she acknowledged the 3. Aaron glared at her. He's been a beast since you ran off. I'll do my best to cheer him up, she muttered, stifling an eye roll as she pushed past the men and into the private room. The ceiling of the carousel suite was a pastel rainbow of soft color changing clouds and shimmering suncatchers. A small circular stage lined with full-sized carousel horses sat in the center. Sofas and lounge chairs were arranged in various places around the outer edge of the room, and white velvet curtains covered the walls. It was supposed to give the high rollers the impression that they had died and gone to heaven. Dahlia stepped into the suite, allowing her eyes to adjust, and there he was. Gideon stood on the opposite end of the room. He was wearing another of his perfectly fitted suits, though he seemed to have lost his jacket, blood-coated, the ends of his sleeves. He had the appearance of a demon indulging in heavenly delights. He looked up at her and his eyes glowed like cobalt fire. That devastating gaze reflected the wrath of a man trapped in hell. Dahlia swallowed hard. Those eyes had such an effect on her. It was as if she could feel the heat from those twin flames reaching out across the space, licking her skin. Heat crept through her body and arousal pooled between her thighs. Geez, only seconds in the same room with the alpha and she'd already lost control of her body. Why did you leave? Gideon's hands balled into fists. Dahlia felt like she had swallowed a golf ball. Took several seconds for her to find her voice. I won't be held captive again. Again. Gideon's eyes blazed with fury. Dahlia realized her mistake and cursed silently. Her heart raced as pain and fear sank their claws into her chest. She did not want to talk about this. When she did respond, it was in a soft, sad voice. It was a long time ago. Escape, that's what matters. The next time Gideon spoke, his voice was slow and controlled, but a thunderous and menacing power hid behind it. A growl rolled off of each syllable. Who hurt you? The glow in his eyes meant his wolf was close to the surface. She could see the strain as his chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. His beast was fighting for control. Her gaze fell again to the crimson blood on his crisp white sleeves. He followed her eyes. Slowly he began to roll each sleeve up, hiding the bloodstains and revealing muscled forearms. Something about the action was strangely erotic. It sent a pulse of excitement humming through her. I'll ask you one more time, Dahlia. Who fucking hurt you? Gideon took a step forward and she walked the opposite direction. They circled the carousel stage, both keeping their distance from the other, their eyes locked the entire time. Gideon moved slowly, deliberately. Dahlia knew he had enhanced speed. At any moment he could choose to catch her. The thought was thrilling. Blood pumped through her body and her nerves tingled in anticipation. Gideon was the one in control. He was always in control. A mischievous thought developed in her mind. She would give him a taste of his own medicine. Stop, she ordered, putting all the weight she could behind her words. Seat. She pointed to a gold and green velvet chair. Gideon stilled, obviously contemplating his next move. Give in and obey? Or continue his hunt? Something in her gaze must have convinced him it would be worth his time. He sat, his eyes a dark sea as they continued roaming her body. She approached him, getting nearly to his lap. He reached for her, exactly as she had hoped. The vines ripped from beneath him with astonishing speed. His wrists were engulfed and then yanked down. Behind him, the green tangles wove around his forearms and in between the gaps. In the back of the chair. She had caught him by surprise. That was a victory in itself. He turned those blazing sapphire eyes toward her again. His voice came out deep and smooth. You've seen me break through these before. She nodded. True. His eyes glowed even more brightly. I'm going to tear through these, sweetheart, and then I'm going to bend you over my lap and rip that tiny outfit off you leaf by leaf. His gaze raked over her skin. She shuddered. The idea of Gideon bending her over his knee and slowly removing all her clothes was almost appealing enough to let him do it. No. She had other plans. Bending over would have to wait. Dahlia smiled, giving Gideon her best. Go ahead and try it. Look. He lunged forward, only to abruptly stop. The look on his face was pure shock. As a choked gasp escaped his throat, Dahlia relished it. A bead of sweat formed on his perfect forehead. Thorns, she stated matter-of-factly, answering the unspoken question in his eyes. He tested the vines once more and jerked to a halt. Droplets of sticky wet blood fell to the floor behind the chair. His eyes narrowed. Now he understood. The harder he struggled, the deeper the thorns would dig. She wasn't too concerned. He was a Leakin after all, and an alpha at that. Everything she heard was true. The wounds probably healed nearly as quickly as he caused them. Her excitement waned as he dropped his head toward the floor. Maybe it had been too much. She thought Gideon would be into it, but a tightening in the gut had her questioning everything. Panic rose in her veins. A moment later, Gideon raised his head again. A smile tugged on the corners of his full lips. He stared at her hungrily. Very clever. What's next? Oh gosh, the way he was looking at her made her drip. She squeezed her thighs together and his nostrils flared. No doubt he could scent her arousal. He struggled more subtly. He wanted her bad. He wanted her bad enough to drive those thorns deeper into his own flesh. She was so turned on she wouldn't be surprised if there was a puddle on the floor where stood. His eyes darkened and his voice rolled out slow and low. Get over here. She obliged, closing the distance between them. She leaned near his face, hovering centimeters from his lips before denying him the kiss and dropping to her knees. Gideon's eyes lit with realization. He squirmed in his seat, ignoring the pain that had to be radiating through his arms. Dahlia slowly unbuttoned his dress shirt, allowing it to fall open and expose his massive chest and chiseled stomach. She dragged her fingernail from the top of his collarbone down to his belt line. He groaned and shifted in his seat. She removed his belt and used it to give him a little smack across the abs. He let out a feral sound that sent blood pumping to her throbbing clit. Shaky fingers opened his pants, allowing his massive cock to spring free. Taking it in both hands, she gazed down at it. Pre-cum beaded on the swollen tip. Gideon nearly jumped out of his seat when she bent down and used her tongue to swipe the glistening droplet away. She wrapped her lips tightly around his smooth, pulsing length and began to glide up and down. Her mouth worked on the tip in unison with her hands as they twisted and milked his solid shaft. Gideon murmured incoherently as she pleasured him. She dared to look up and found his sapphire eyes burning into her, his lids heavy with lust. He moaned in ecstasy, the sound of it melting the needy space between her thighs. Unable to resist, she removed a hand from his burning shaft and guided it to her own heated center. Gideon's pupils blew wide as he watched her. A deep growl rumbled from his chest, vibrating straight through her. That's it. He spurred her on, his voice strained. Take what you need. Good girl. She continued, sucking and squeezing him as she drove her fingers relentlessly into her own core. Her jaw burned from the repetitive motion and Gideon's thick sighs, but the slowly building pressure within her drove her forward. She sped up, matching her mouth motions on Gideon to the frantic pace of the fingers pressing her closer and closer to climax. Gideon shifted his hips in time with her lips. God, you're so hot. Come for me, Dahlia. Her name on his heavy tongue was enough to press her over the edge. An orgasm tore through her as she continued her tantalizing assault on Gideon's cock. She moaned around him as her release subsided, sinking him deeper into her mouth until he hit the back of her throat. Wet gags rolled out of her as he continued to fill her so fully. The burning in her jaw intensified and her eyes watered at the sensation, but she didn't stop. She wanted to give him the mind-blowing pleasure he had given her before. She wanted every inch of him. The greedy sound she made as she hollowed her cheeks on him seemed to push Gideon to the brink of his own release. A guttural moan filled the suite as he emptied himself into Dahlia's eager mouth. She was so lost in euphoria she barely noticed the sticky liquid sliding down her throat. Gideon twitched as Dahlia removed her lips from him. They both breathed heavily. She turned her eyes toward him and smiled. He stared at her in awe, shaking his head in disbelief. Go get your stuff, he commanded. We're leaving. This sexy bossy man. She didn't want to fight him. He had bought her time for the night, and from the look in his eyes she knew exactly how he wanted to spend it. When she didn't move right away, he raised an eyebrow. Unless you'd rather I take you here in the club on stage with everyone watching. The thought sent a shiver running through her. That's what I thought. Now go get your things and meet me outside. She nodded and moved toward the door on wobbly legs. It was only when she reached the exit that she finally relinquished her control of the thorny vines. Gideon sighed in relief as he rubbed his sore wrists. She closed the door behind her. The other three were still outside. They stared silently at the ground, smirks on each of their handsome faces. I think he'll be in a better mood now, she breathed out. Aaron issued a low, holy shit, beneath his breath. It brought a triumphant smile to her lips. She turned and left to collect her belongings. Chapter 13. The car ride home was quiet torture. Dahlia sat on one end with Gideon next to her. Lucas, Lance, and Aaron sat as far away from them as possible. Dahlia found herself thinking back to the encounter in the carousel suite. Her jaw felt sore from Gideon's girth, but she would never forget his woodsy masculine scent swirling all around her. He was huge and thick, and she couldn't wait to feel him inside more than just her mouth. Gideon looked down at her and let out a warning growl. He whispered into Dahlia's ear, if I can scent your arousal, then so can they. He nodded toward the three lichens who were trying to look literally anywhere else but in their direction. So, Dahlia whispered back mischievously. Gideon's eyes glowed. You keep testing me. If you think I won't take you in front of my pack mates to stake my claim, you're wrong. He slid a hand to her thigh. You're mine. Oh God, was he actually going to fuck her with all three watching? She let out a semi-disappointed sigh when the limo stopped. The three men bolted out of the door like their tails were on fire. Dahlia smiled to herself. Gideon radiated power and control. It was sexy as hell. He bent down and nipped at her neck. After you. His words were hot on her throat. They made their way up the steps and nearly bumped right into a small figure. Arya? What are you doing out this late? And alone? Gideon stared down questioningly at his sister.
Arya paled.
Hey Gid. I was just out. She caught sight of Dahlia and squealed. Oh my God. Arya embraced her. I'm so glad you're back. Gideon has been unbearably alpha since you left. She glared up at her brother. Dahlia giggled. So I've heard. You have got to come to brunch tomorrow. All the girls will be there and you can meet them. Her blue eyes twinkled. Being under the microscope of all the girls in Arya's friend group didn't sound super enticing. There will be mimosas, Arya added to sweeten the pot. I never pass up mimosas, Dahlia said with a resounding sigh. Perfect. Well, don't let me interrupt your night. Arya scurried up the steps. See you tomorrow. And with that she was gone. Gideon frowned. I think she's been avoiding me. I've been doing my best, but ever since the incident earlier this year. Is it possible you're just being paranoid? I hope so. That worry in his eyes sent a wave of achy sadness through her. She leaned in closer to him, taking his hand in hers. Warmth spread through both of them at the contact. She looked up from their interlocked hands to Gideon's handsome face. Sapphire eyes changed from worried to hungry. His interlocked fingers tightened as he led her up the stairs and through the nearly empty lobby. The two stumbled into the elevator in a tangle of limbs and lips as the lift slowly made its way to their floor. Dahlia's heart raced in anticipation. She could feel energy flowing off of Gideon. The sexual tension between them had been driving her crazy. Gideon's hand trailed up her thigh and skimmed across her damp panties. She let out a long moan and he nipped at her neck again. The elevator dinged as it reached the penthouse floor. Gideon backed out of the small space, dragging Dahlia with him, his lips never leaving hers. A few steps away from the apartment doors, Dahlia felt her powers surge and her blood chill. She became very still. Gideon looked down in confusion and concern, somehow feeling her massive emotional shift. What is it? His hands cupped her cheeks as he gazed into her face. Dahlia turned away from him, facing a hallway that led away from the elevators. They had just exited. She could feel something calling to her, something begging for her attention, her help. She walked quickly, allowing her magic to guide her where she needed to go. The closer it came, the faster she moved. As the hallways blurred past, she was vaguely aware of Gideon moving close behind her, shouting something she couldn't make out. She had picked up to a full run by the time the large wooden door came into sight. It was a truly massive door, ornately carved with delicate plants, flowers, and animals. The center and largest carved area featured a whimsical wisteria tree. Even without its usual lavender coloring, Dahlia could recognize its beautiful shape. Elegant flowers and soft piled petals surrounded the wisteria. Birds dotted the top corners of the frame, perching on the thickly carved rope that outlined the wooden art. A snake wound its way through the intricate tree branches, gazing down upon sleeping deer and small fuzzy chipmunks. Dahlia's heart tightened when her eyes reached the base of the tree. Two wolves stood beneath a rain of wisteria blossoms, their necks rubbing up against each other. The gilded handle begged for Dahlia's touch. The metal was cold beneath her hand, but the door swung open with more ease than she expected for its exceptional size. It was dark in the room and it took Dahlia several moments to adjust to the sights around her. Whispers called to her from every corner of this space. Magic swirled to life as she realized she was standing in a massive greenhouse. She shuddered. It must have been green at some point, not the floral graveyard it was today. The entire space was filled with death and decay. Trees, plants, pots, and flower beds, all long forgotten. What is this place? Her voice was filled with wonder. Gideon placed a warm hand on her lower back. It's the greenhouse. My father built it as a surprise for my mother. She loved all things green. Dahlia could sense the love in every architectural aspect of the greenhouse. The massive amount of plants that had clearly thrived here at some point showed a true gift and passion for flowers and greenery. What happened? She whispered, sensing a tragedy among these barren leaves. My parents. They died and I couldn't bear to come back in here. It reminded me too much of her. It reminded me too much of what I had lost. Gideon dropped his hand from her back. Dahlia threaded her fingers in his and reached up to touch his grief-stricken face. Can I make it green again? Gideon's blue eyes softened as he kissed the back of her hand. His voice sounded heavy with emotion. Yes, I think she would like that. Dahlia knew exactly where to start. She moved to the center of the room where a large twisted tree trunk stood, withered and neglected. Anxiety built around her. It always did before she used her powers. She'd gotten used to keeping them hidden, being fearful someone would see. Seemingly sensing her apprehension, Gideon called out to her. And Dahlia, don't hold back. Relief left her body with the next exhale and a dam broke inside her. With both hands on the trunk she allowed her magic to flow, with no restrictions and no fear. The wisteria flared to life. A lively brown brightened its branches. Glimmering green leaves coated the thick tangle of top-heavy vines. Lavender wisteria flowers burst open upon every available limb and surface. She gazed up at the pure beauty. It was perfect, just like the carving on the door. Behind her, Gideon gasped. The wisteria refueled her confidence and joy. She pushed waves of energy and power out in every direction. Vivid greens exploded all around the greenhouse. Vibrant flowers in every imaginable color opened their long-lost faces toward the stars above. Color pops of pink, peach, red, and blue continued to grow, climb and coat every surface. Dahlia allowed the magic to simply flow through her. Bushes and brush, trees and topiaries, all manner of lush and lovely plants continued to sprout and thrive. Dahlia filled every available inch with beautiful greenery and flowers. The moon shone brightly above, illuminating the freshly revived gardens. The colors would be even more magical in the daylight. When Dahlia finally released her hold on the magic, she was breathing heavily, but had never felt more free. She had been so caught up in the moment she hadn't heard him approach. Gideon wrapped strong arms around her as they gazed at her masterpiece together. You are so special, Dahlia. You are so special to me. Emotion welled within her as he nuzzled her neck. Thank you for allowing me to see you. You are absolutely magnificent. Something hot and wet coated Dahlia's cheek. She lifted her hand up and realized she was crying. Tears had begun to stream down, dropping to the glossy floor below. Gideon turned her to face him. He stroked the back of his hand down one damp cheek before pulling her to him. His earthy, heady scent enveloped her. Strong arms held her in place. With that feeling of total security, her walls finally fell. She sobbed into his chest, allowing years of unshed tears to flow freely. After so much time hiding, being ashamed, worrying she'd be an outcast, a freak, she finally felt free to be herself. Her parents hadn't accepted her for what she was, but Gideon did. He supported her as she continued to bawl. At some point Gideon shifted them to a seated position and drew her into his lap. He held her tightly, whispering soothing words into her ear and allowing her to just be. He seemed to understand what she was feeling. They sat together under a gentle rain of wisteria petals, until Dahlia's eyes grew heavy in sleep. Chapter 14. Dahlia padded into the kitchen. She had wrapped herself up in one of Gideon's soft sheets. She shuffled forward, just as Gideon rounded the corner. He had a coffee mug in one hand and his phone in the other. You're awake. His deep, silky voice held an adorable excitement that caused her chest to warm. She answered, sleep still coloring her mind and voice. Gideon was dressed in another of his impeccable suits. His handsome face was framed by the glow of fresh morning sun streaming in through a nearby window. She let out a contented sigh. This is exactly the view I want to wake up to every morning. Her eyes scanned his body, but maybe with less clothes. Gideon's eyes glowed. Dirty girl. What am I going to do with you? Dahlia giggled as he set down his mug and swept her up in a passionate kiss. Gideon's phone rang and he cursed as he released her. I've gotta go. I'm late for work and you have brunch to get ready for. Brunch? I almost forgot. Gideon pressed another kiss to her knuckles. I got you something. He walked out of the kitchen and returned a moment later holding a dress, sandals, and a shopping bag. I had my associate drop these off this morning. I hope you like it. Dahlia's heart melted. The dress was long and flowy. It cinched at the waist and was topped with a sweetheart neck and 2 ribbon straps. The color was what made her emotional. The sundress was an ombre starting with a white top that led to a soft lavender bodice and finally a gemmy purple skirt. It reminded me of the wisteria tree. Gideon gave a boyish smile. It looked out of place on his masculine face. What do you think? His uncertainty was adorable and endearing. I love it. Good. Gideon's phone rang again. He gave her a quick peck and headed out. Help yourself to anything in the apartment. Have fun at brunch. I'll see you later. Those final 4 words made Dahlia's stomach swoop with anticipation. He gave her one last dazzling smile before leaving. Dahlia made tea and took it to the greenhouse. She drank the warm, soothing beverage surrounded by the flowers and trees. Her flowers and trees, bride, swelled within her. Maybe it wasn't a curse. It certainly looked like a gift. In this light, the colors of each bloom seemed even more vibrant under the bright Georgia sun. A text from Arya gave a time and place for brunch. Dahlia showered and donned the wisteria sundress and sandals. The shopping bag ended up housing makeup and hair products. She finished getting ready and giddily sauntered off to brunch. She was down the elevator and almost out the front door when a thought grew in her mind. She turned to the security guard currently working in the lobby. Can you direct me to Gideon's office? Dahlia smiled. This was going to be fun. Gideon's first few meetings flew by. He felt calm, settled, and so did his wolf. It had reveled in just holding Dahlia all night. Of course it had also encouraged him to bite and claim her every moment he was awake, but it was progress. He had lay there for hours breathing in her wildflower scent. He cocked an eyebrow, a scent that he thought he could smell again right at this moment. His wolf perked up. His office door slid open, and Dahlia came waltzing in. She looked absolutely stunning in the dress he had bought her. The purple and white material clung to her in all the right ways. I didn't have you on my schedule. He gave her an amused smirk. Last-minute opening. I thought you'd like to see your handiwork. She gave a whimsical twirl and the lavender skirt fluttered and flowed around her. He got up and moved predatorily around his desk. Let me take a closer look. He stalked toward Dahlia. Her cheeks bloomed red under his heated gaze. He could hear her heartbeat pick up as he neared. Wide green eyes stared up at him hopefully. His hand slid down her bare arms before landing on her hips. In one swift motion he pulled her to him, pressing their hips together. She let out a surprised yelp before melting into his hold. He sipped at her mouth softly, slowly. When he pried her lips open with his tongue, she let out a breathy moan. He delved in, using his tongue to tease her. He could scent her sweet arousal now. He'd been hard since he smelled her intoxicating wildflower scent outside his office doors. Gideon. Her words were thick with desire. I want you so bad. I need you. Please. Oh God, did he need her too? Dahlia's body was on fire. They hadn't had sex since that first time and she had been craving it for weeks. Gideon had been a gentleman when she was emotional the night before, but the time for sensitivity was over. I want you so bad, she panted. I need you. Please. Gideon didn't hesitate. He dove back into the kiss and used his body to back her up against his desk. She hit the large wooden furniture with a thud before Gideon turned her around to face it. His breath was warm against her ear. I only have a few minutes before my next meeting. If you want this, he ground his hard erection into her hips. You better stay quiet and reach for the edge of the desk. She eagerly obliged, laying her stomach flat on the desk before reaching for its firm edge. He hiked up the dress and slid her panties to the floor. His nostrils flared as he exhaled. Then dropping to his knees, he dipped his face between her thighs. Gideon feasted on her, sliding his tongue all the way up before sinking his teeth into the soft flesh of her ass. She jumped at the unexpected pain and a whine of pure need and desire drove from her lungs. His tongue was punishing as it dove inside, making her legs shake as pleasure swallowed every rational thought she had. He licked at her, lapping up the juices. She moaned as all of her nerve endings fired to life beneath his tongue and the electric touch of his fingers against her clit. He pulled out and growled against her flesh. If you want to get fucked, you'll come for me now. She had already been dangerously close to the edge, and that sexy, commanding threat had her spiraling as he circled her flesh and tongue. Fucked her from behind. Bliss melted her insides as she came hard around his tongue. He gave her one final nip on the ass. Good girl, he murmured against her skin after her climax subsided. When he rose again, his belt and zipper hit the floor. The butterflies swooped. Within her. He was big and thick. Would she be able to take him again? Gideon pressed his body up against hers and the full tip of his erection toyed with her entrance. He leaned down and whispered against the shell of her ear, "Hold on tight and try not to scream." Her grip tightened on the desk, but she was unable to remain quiet when his cock pushed inside. Her body stretched to accommodate him. The mix of pleasure and pain was maddening. He took his time the first few strokes, sliding the tip in and out before sinking deeper. As soon as he managed to fit himself fully inside, he picked up the pace. "God, you take me so well." Gideon thrust into her. The desk shook beneath them and she held onto it for dear life. Hard and fast, that's what was happening here. Dahlia didn't know when his next meeting was, but she had a feeling based on his intensity and speed that it was sooner than expected. His hands kneaded her hips as he rocked into her. Gideon was an expert at pleasuring her body. He knew exactly how to touch her, exactly what angle to enter her. She moaned again as he changed the rhythm slightly. Her body reacted, allowing the already building climax to swallow her in an unbearable and burning need for release. Another hard thrust slammed into her and every internal muscle clenched him tightly in an intense contraction. His hand covered her mouth just as she screamed out. He rode her through the wave of bliss. Before her pleasure-scrambled brain had time to reassemble, Gideon turned her around and hoisted her into the desk. He wrapped his arms beneath her knees, spreading her wide. "Grab onto me," he bit out, the strain in his voice betraying just how close he was. Her fingers dug into his thick, knotted shoulders. The feel of those muscles flexing and moving beneath her palms seriously turned her on. Gideon continued to slam into her as he split her legs apart wider. "One more time. Come for me." He bent down, kissed the sensitive skin beneath her ear, and grazed his teeth against her throat. "Gideon!" she cried out as a blinding orgasm rushed through her. Strong fingers dug into her thighs. Momentarily, that bruising touch was her only awareness of the present. The desk lurched under his continued powerful thrusts. Seconds behind her, Gideon roared and tensed as he found his own dizzying release. Being with him was a whirlwind of euphoria. He slipped from her with a low groan. His hands ghosted down her tingling skin. She would never get enough of this. He pressed their foreheads together as he slowly released her legs. She was definitely going to be sore after that. He cupped her face with both hands and planted a long, deep kiss on her mouth. "You are going to be the death of me, woman." Dahlia tried to laugh, but it came out more like a moan and wheeze combined as she still fought to catch her breath. Gideon's intercom blinked to life. He broke from her and quickly redressed. "You better get out of here before the meeting starts. Plus, Arya will have my head if you miss brunch because of me." Dahlia got to her feet. She was unsure if her legs were actually going to function, but they held her weight as she limped away. "The death of me," Gideon mumbled from behind her as she left his office. Sticky seed dripped down her legs and she stumbled into the nearest bathroom. She was definitely going to be late for brunch, but that quickie was so worth. Chapter 15. The easy walk to Le Crepe gave Dahlia a chance to look around Mountain's End and to cool down after her little workplace rendezvous. The Georgia mountains and forests made such a beautiful backdrop. She was just stepping into the restaurant when her phone buzzed with a text from Christina. "Hey girl, where have you been? Are you free to talk? A lot of shit has happened since you ran off with one of the fivesome candidates." Dahlia giggled. Christina was so ridiculous. Dahlia felt a little guilty, having scurried out of the club with Gideon and leaving her friend to wonder. "What happened?" "Sorry, they've been keeping me busy. I can barely keep up with all four. I'm about to have brunch. Can I call you after?" Christina's reply came instantly. "You better be fucking kidding me. And if not, me and my empty feet are jealous AF. Call me immediately after brunch. Need all the juicy details." "Will do." The girls were easy enough to find at Le Crepe. Dahlia could hear them before she could see them. They sat at a beautiful outdoor table. A white trellis filled with lemon trees covered most of the patio. The ripe yellow fruit dangled all around the space, filling the air with a soft, citrus scent. "There she is," Arya called out as Dahlia approached. "Everyone, meet my new best friend, Dahlia." Her lovely smile flipped to a frown. "Who showed up?" 20 minutes late and smelling like my brother. Aria's painted pink lips stuck out in a pout. Dahlia tucked a hair behind her ear as all eyes landed on her.
Sorry I'm
late. I got lost. Lost in my brother's bed, you mean? Aria's frown deepened. On his desk, actually. The words were out before she realized what she had said. She threw a hand up to cover her mouth as heat rushed to her cheeks. There was a moment of stunned silence before the entire table erupted in laughter and squeals. Oh my God. That is hot. Brona fanned herself theatrically. Aria was the only one who didn't look amused. Sit down before you scar me for life with more of your confessions. We went ahead and ordered for you. Dahlia quickly took her seat, biting into her bottom lip. Ladies, this is Dahlia, Gideon's newest obsession. Dahlia, these are my girls. You already know Lori. The elegant blonde gave Dahlia one of her warm smiles. And Brona. The stunning redhead still unnerved Dahlia a bit. They hadn't seen each other since she had woken up in the penthouse after the attack. Brona had sensed Dahlia's magic. It made her feel vulnerable and exposed. Turquoise eyes sparkled back along with a genuine smile. I'm so happy to see you are doing well. I'm sure Gideon is thrilled to have you back. Dahlia smiled back. Maybe she had misjudged the magic user or chosen as what they called them. Those two are the twins, Aria continued. Ginger and Clove. Dahlia recognized the two girls from breakfast at the Roost. Gigi, please. The first twin stuck out her hand. She had strawberry blonde hair and a sun-kissed complexion. The second twin gave the same friendly gesture. Dahlia remembered her jet-black hair with the brilliant blue stripes. They both donned identical faces and those unusual eyes, one green, one gold. It's good to see you again, Clove said.
Aria sulked.
You two have already met? Clove gave a mischievous smile. Yeah, Gideon brought her to the coop, but she ran out of the restaurant and disappeared. It was a whole thing. Right. That's when Gid went all crazy alpha. Aria looked at Dahlia. Why did you run away? Gosh, those cobalt eyes look so much like Gideon's. Everyone's curious gazes bore into Dahlia. Thankfully Lori stepped in, saving her from answering. I think she could use a mimosa before we pry any further into her personal life, or her relationship with Gideon. She slid a champagne flute toward her and Dahlia graciously accepted it. Aria twirled her own glass in her hand. Well, the way Gideon stares at her. They're practically mated already. I don't see an alpha's mark yet. Ginger gave her an impish grin. What's an alpha's mark? Dahlia felt like she was on the other end of the joke where everyone else knew the punchline. It's something alphas give their wives when they're claimed. It's like a permanent mark to show everyone you're his forever. And on that note, Aria refilled everyone's glass from the carafe. Cheers to my future sister-in-law. Dahlia choked on the bubbly drink. She began coughing and pounding a hand to her chest as the bubbles and tangy fruit juice rose up into her nose. Lori patted a hand on her back. Let's talk about something else for a bit. Yeah, like who those snobby new foreigners are. Clove narrowed her mismatched eyes. Aria drained her glass and slammed it on the table. You mean the alpha from the London territory? Yeah, he brought his bitchy daughter and creepy son for some kind of visit.
Aria Lori chided.
It's true. Liv acts like she's some sort of princess and Harrison gives me serial killer vibes every time I'm around him. I heard that the son Harrison stays in wolf form like all the time. Ginger shrugged. Maybe he's losing touch with his human side. They were a little off-putting when they came to the restaurant and my wolf was pretty uncomfortable the whole time. Clove turned to Lori. Has Lance told you anything about why they're here? Being married to the beta has to give you some sort of access to info. Lori ducked her head. You know I'm not allowed to discuss those kinds of things. They're here for a meeting. I'm sure the alpha will tell us anything. He wants us to know when he's ready. Clove scoffed. Well, I'm ready to know now. So Dahlia, next time you two are getting freaky, ask him about the London wolves. Oh my gosh, can we please stop talking about my brother having sex?
Aria
pushed her glass aside and took a few swigs straight from the carafe. Ginger giggled. Aria, you are practically feral. Yeah, Clove added. Maybe you and Harrison could date? Clove ducked just in time to avoid the pancake that soared over her head.
Aria fumed.
Clove clapped her hands together. Yep, a perfect match. The table erupted in laughter. I'm going to stop inviting you nasty twins as soon as Nova is back, Aria grumbled into her remaining pancakes. Who's Nova? Dahlia spoke for the first time in a while.
Aria beamed.
She's this incredible, gorgeous, silver-haired goddess who can control fire and ice. She and her mate Darren left right after their wedding for some secret mission, but Gideon refuses to tell me what it's for. I think it has something to do with finding more celestials. Dahlia's fork clattered against her plate. Celestials. Her body felt cold inside. Yeah, you know about celestials. Confusion and excitement glittered across Aria's eyes. Creedon was the only one who had called her that. He told Dahlia it would be dangerous if anyone found out. Turns out he was the danger all along. She didn't want them to know about her capture or that dark part of her life. She didn't want them to know she was a celestial. It was probably best to keep things vague. I've heard of them. Wow, that's crazy. You know about celestials and shifters? Where exactly do you come from? You are going to love Nova. To Dahlia's relief, Aria rattled on before she could answer. Her husband can be all broody and dark, but deep down Darren's a good guy. There was more small talk among the women and Dahlia wanted to participate, but a feeling of dread had taken root in her chest. A loud clang interrupted her contemplations. A lemon had fallen from the trellis and onto their table. Then another and another. The sound of lemons pelting dishes and restaurant patrons became audible throughout the patio. Oh shit. Dahlia's sour mood was affecting the plants nearby. She took a deep breath and sent a subtle wave of energy out toward the nearby trees. The rain of lemons abruptly stopped. That was weird. Aria looked around, mystified. When Dahlia glanced up, she found shimmering turquoise eyes beaming into her. Brona had felt something. She was sure of it. The other woman stared a moment longer, but did not out her to the group. Well, ladies. Lori pushed her plate away. I think that's enough. Excitement for one day. I've got to get a few things in order for the barbecue tomorrow. Aria protested, but the other girls agreed with Lori. Maybe the strange lemon phenomenon had freaked them out. Fine, but y'all better meet me at my apartment to pregame beforehand. Did Gideon tell you about the barbecue? She asked Dahlia. Nope. Dahlia's face warmed. They hadn't exactly done a lot of talking since their reunion. Ugh, boys. Aria rolled her eyes. Lori can fill you in. Absolutely. It's called the Summer Fair, Lori said, her blue eyes brightening. We have a huge barbecue and festival. All the complex residents, as well as any of the surrounding mountains and shifters, are invited. There's food, games, and drinks. It's really very fun. I got Gideon to splurge on a food truck that fries every type of food imaginable. Even butter. I'm trying one of everything. Aria pumped her fist in the air triumphantly. Clove gave her an unimpressed look. He's like a multimillionaire or billionaire. I doubt a fried food truck set him back. Dahlia's mind raced. Was he really that rich? Now that she thought about it, it was obvious. The penthouse apartment, fancy suits, buying her time at the fun house. Lori flagged down the waiter. Can we get the check? Their impeccably dressed server grinned. It's already been taken care of. Aria spun around. Someone bought all of our brunch? He nodded. You can thank Mr. Ulrich. Everyone gasped in delight. Aria rolled her eyes again. Fine. My brother is paying. I want a dozen chocolate croissants, 2 quiche Florentines, and plate of Nutella crepes to go. Brona shook her head. Aria, you eat like a man. Leakin. She pointed to herself. A warm glow filled Dahlia. Gideon had bought their brunch. How adorable. Stop looking so starry-eyed over there. Aria raised an eyebrow at her. Dahlia took out her phone and typed a message to Gideon. Thanks for brunch. He typed back, anything for you. Still, it was a pretty stiff bill with all those bottomless mimosas. I'd love to pay you back somehow. What did you have in mind? Why don't you take an early lunch break and meet me at the apartment in 20? His response gave her a rush of excitement. I'll be there. The other girls got off at various floors in the complex, eventually leaving Dahlia alone. She used the keycard Gideon had given her and re-emerged on the penthouse level. Would he already be there when she arrived? Just thinking of him made her giddy. What had that man done to her? He was turning her into damn nymphomaniac. She hurried out of the elevators and toward the door, but paused when she saw it was open. So Gideon did get there before her. She entered the apartment quietly, hoping to sneak up on him. He wasn't in the living room, not in the kitchen. A sound came from the bedroom and she bounded toward it. The first thing she noticed was the strong smell. Perfume. A lot of perfume. The second thing was the scantily clad and incredibly gorgeous woman lying on Gideon's bed. She had fair brown hair that tumbled past her shoulders and soft golden eyes. The woman looked as surprised as Dahlia felt. You? You're not supposed to. How did this? What are you even doing here? The golden eyes glared accusingly. Me. Dahlia planted her hands on her hips. What are you doing in Gideon's bed? Waiting for Gideon, obviously. The girl spoke as if it should have been common knowledge that Gideon had random women waiting in his bed at all hours of the day. Though Dahlia laughed at that notion, it did send a wave of insecurity through her. She swallowed the feelings. Who are you? The mousy stranger crawled out of the bed and stood to face Dahlia.
I'm Liv.
Gideon's fiancée. She held out her hand to show the massive sparkly diamond that rested on her finger. Pretty, isn't it? It's a family heirloom. Dahlia felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Ice water flooded her veins. That's not true. Her voice shook and it made her hate herself for showing such weakness. Liv raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. My father is uniting our packs. Thought Gideon would have told you by now. I know you had a fling, but it wasn't serious, was it? I mean, it's not like he gave you the mark. Dahlia's gut continued to churn. What mark? The Alpha's mark. Liv's eyes lit up. That one bite that leaves a visible claim on the Alpha's mate. Forever. The mark is really meant for someone like me. Liv frowned as she assessed Dahlia's face up and down. You're not a shifter, so maybe you didn't know. I'm just trying to help you out. Liv tried to sound sincere, but Dahlia could sense the condescending bullshit beneath her sugary tone. It was insulting. The fucking mark. It's exactly what the girls had been talking about at brunch. This little tart thought she was getting one? From Gideon? Not a chance. You're lying. Dahlia's voice sounded foreign as blood pounded in her ears. Surely this couldn't be true. Why would Gideon keep this from her?
Liv chewed her lip, appearing anxious.
Surely the Leakin could feel the rage pouring from Dahlia's body. Please don't make this more difficult than it has to be. It's a Leakin thing. I'm sure it's painful, but you're human. You never really had a chance with an alpha. Liv gave her a pitying look. I think it would be better for everyone if you just left. But Dahlia couldn't move. Irrational anger had taken hold of her senses. Please, if you don't leave, I will have to call security. The Leakin woman reached for her purse. Dahlia saw red and the vines erupted from the floor. She started with a ankles, grinning as Liv looked down in horror. What is this? Liv's confident demeanor vanished as the greenery grew and it sent a bud of satisfaction flourishing within Dahlia. The ivy and vines snaked their way upward, encircling Liv's small frame and slowly tightening. Terror filled those golden eyes and she screamed. Dahlia pushed them harder, silencing Liv with a flick of the wrist. The screams became muffled, frantic. Dahlia! Gideon's voice boomed into the room. That's enough. When she didn't listen, he shackled one of her wrists in his firm grasp. Stop. Now. The energy wave that rolled off of him was pure alpha and pure rage. The vines vanished and Liv dropped to the floor, coughing and shaking. Vomit rose in Dahlia's throat. She tried to kill me. Liv screeched as she scrambled to her feet. Terror. Fill those golden eyes. Get her away from me. A growl tore across the space and Liv cowered. Liv, what are you doing here? I came to visit you, she said reticently. My fiancé. Gideon looked from Liv to Dahlia. His voice was measured, the power palpable beneath his words. You are not my fiancé, Liv. I never agreed to that. Now, kindly leave my apartment and don't ever let me catch you in here without my permission again. Panic filled her wide eyes. You don't understand. We have to be mated out. Gideon's voice remained firm. She looked desperate as she pleaded with him. We have to do this. It will be very bad for you and her if we don't. Gideon's irises glowed and the air in the room became thick and hard to breathe. He stepped closer to Liv and the small woman shrank back. This is not your daddy's home. I am the alpha of this territory. You don't get to tell me what to do and you never get to threaten the people under my care. Now if you don't leave this room immediately, it will be very bad for you. It must have tasted bitter to have her words thrown back in her face. With tears in those golden eyes, she ran out of the apartment, slamming the door. Behind her, Dahlia's heart beat wildly as Gideon's gaze bore into her. You shouldn't have used your powers on her. Oh, I'm the one in trouble? How about your secret fiancé bullshit? Want to tell me about that? She had a ring on her finger, Dahlia spat out. A big, sparkly family heirloom. How could you do this to me? She tried to shoulder past him, but he blocked her path. It may be a family heirloom, but it's not from my family. I didn't give her any ring. He stopped Dahlia with his hands on her shoulders. Still fuming, Dahlia craned her neck to peer up at him. Tell me what's going on.